For joining me on another Truth Matters. It's going to be an interesting discussion, and I hope that you will find it edifying and you'll be able to identify with something that we talk about or know somebody who maybe you can hear something that you can help them to deal with their situation. I have with me on the panel tonight Reverend Ashana Knight from joining us live from London, Bishop Woodrow Thompson from the Mid-Atlantic area of the Church of God of Prophecy, and Bishop Dr. Roger Ball, our social worker and pro in that field. And so we're going to have a conversation when we come back. We're going to talk about how trauma affect one's life for a lifetime, how it can affect one's life. ORB Ministry presents Let's Talk with the Doc. Grace Without Borders podcast. A thought for you. Ask Pastor. And a whole lot more. You never know what's next or who will join the conversation. All right, so here we are on another Truth Matters. Let's talk with it out, but this is Truth Matters. And so I'm excited to have Bishop Ball with me and joining us as our special guest and a new member to our panel, Bishop Woodrow Thompson. Unfortunately, some of our members are not on the panel tonight because the General Assembly is in progress as we speak. So all of my Church of God members, our panel members, are on big business tonight. So we are going to do the best we can to enjoy and to share with you as much as the Lord will allow us, and hope that we can help somebody to get a grasp on how to deal with trauma and the real effect of trauma. All right, so let me go around the horn. Let me go from the farthest point and then welcome Reverend Ashana to the conversation in England. How has it been? I was watching the Wimbledon today, and I know that they have sunshine in England today, at least at Wimbledon. So,
yes, Bishop. London was probably sunshine in London, but I'm in the West Midlands, and whilst it wasn't raining, it was a bit overcast, and it was a nice mild day to go strolling. But yeah, all is well in the West Midlands, in England, UK. That's where I'm based.
How many days of rain would you say you have on a year round? Are we going to say how many days of sun you maybe have?
Not many days of sun, more days of rain. I would like to count, I would like to say, but we have a lot of days of rain, a lot of days. Jesus. I know, not like the Caribbean where it's,
God bless you all up in England, God bless you all up in England. All right. Okay, Bishop Woodrow Thompson, welcome. Good to have you joining us. Welcome to Truth Matters panel.
Good to be here. Good to be here.
And that's it. How is it? How is it in the Mid-Atlantic?
Well, it's hot over here. Remember, I'm Canadian. I just moved to the Mid-Atlantic region 2 years ago. We're used to the winter weather and snow. We get a little bit of warmth, but man, today was about 83, I think. Yeah. Yesterday was probably about 93. So enjoying the hot weather.
Yeah, I think I saw 94 somewhere in my area today.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. It's pretty scorchy. It's pretty scorchy. We have some wind that I'm not sure where the wind came from, but we have some wind along with that. Bishop Roger Ball, the busiest man around. We can scarcely ever get him to join us on anything, but welcome to another Let's Talk with it, but Truth Matters. Yeah, welcome, sir. Good to have you. How was your day today?
Thank you very much, my brother. My day was good, and it's really, really good to be with you. It's great to join my fellow panelists to engage in this critically important conversation. And thank you so much for the work that you've been doing and continue to do in raising awareness, educating, and inspiring, all of us.
Thank you so much. I wasn't even, you know what? I never even thought of the work that I am doing, you know.
Good, good work, as John Kennedy says. God's work should be our own here.
Okay, all right. Well, I'm blessed, and I'm good to have people like you that I can call on, friends or professionals, and I can call and say, let's talk about this thing because I think this is relevant for the time that we are in, and I think even now more than ever,
Mhm.
it's like trauma is becoming more frequent, and
Yes.
and I think the fact that we make a discovery and we can identify trauma,
Hmm.
then it's like back then, long time in our lives, we just know people died and people went crazy and they lied, all kind of things, but we weren't able to pinpoint anything that may have been the cause, what triggered these things, and we just know that, oh, something happened, but now we have become more aware, more educated, more professionals than can pinpoint and help us to deal with these issues. And so we appreciate men like you, who are in this field. And I would have, I thought of getting my wife on after a while, but I said, I should have invited her on once I
Exactly.
invite Bishop Rajabal on, but then it was a little bit too late to bring her in, and she liked to be well prepared because you and her have been brain buddies together in
Yes.
that field for all these years,
Yes.
for all these years. All right, so tonight we want to talk about how trauma changes the course of one's life,
Mm,
and that sounds very simple. It sounds very simple, but it's very profound.
Mm.
mhm,
You know,
Right.
it's not like a momentary thing. Like
Right.
today and you get it over and you're gone, like your on your business tomorrow. For some people, it changes the course of their lives forever. So for us who are here and for those who are watching, Bishop Rajabal, give us a little bit insight in an overview of the package
mhm.
of trauma and some of its impact. And then we will hear from our panel members, experiences, and maybe questions that we follow through and have a conversation.
Yeah, sure. And by the way, please give my regards to your amazing, beautiful, brilliant wife, who would do great sitting beside the rest of us here on this panel, Lady Beckford. So
I'm gonna tell her she owe me one for that one. So
sounds good. Sounds good. So as we think about, if I may frame it in this way, back in the 90s, there was a study that was done, that is called the Adverse Childhood Experience Studies, or ACEs, the Adverse Childhood Experience Studies. It was done with about 17,000 adults, primarily Caucasians, middle class, and there were about 10 indicators that they looked at. And so they did a number of things. One, they surveyed those 17,000 or so people. But then they also did some follow up with some batteries of medical tests, um, to really check their health. And so the questions that they asked go something like this: before the age 18, did you experience any of these things? And it's about 10 areas, and it includes things like neglect, psychological neglect, physical neglect, abuse, physical abuse, psychological abuse. It includes things like within the family systems, the incarceration of a primary caregiver. Sexual abuse is one of the other ones that's on
Mhm.
there. So, incarceration of a primary caregiver, untreated mental illnesses within the family system, substance use and abuse within the family system, domestic violence within the family system. So, about 10, and I think I might have hit 10, or close to it. So,
Right.
those are the areas that they really looked at. Right? So, up from birth until before 18 years old, how many of these have you experienced? And then what the research shows subsequently is that the more we call them ACEs, the more indicators that that I just mentioned, the more a person who have experienced, the shorter their lifespan becomes. Right. So
Wow.
the more. So, for
Mhm.
example,
Hmm.
those with 6 or more ACEs, right?
Hmm.
Those with 6 or more, child abuse, neglect, substance use within the family, physical violence,
Hmm.
domestic violence, intimate partner violence,
Right.
untreated mental illnesses. Those with 6 or more of those actually die upwards of 20 years earlier than those with none.
Wow.
20 years. There's another, what they indicate that if you look at most people's, and to sound a bit morose and morbid, if you look at most people's, the death certificate, it is said that buried in that death certificate is actually ACEs. So what
Mhm.
they indicate is that, so those who have, the more ACEs you have, the more deleterious impact you have on your life. So you're more likely to suffer from anxiety and depression, more
Hmm.
likely to experience suicidality, more
Correct.
likely to develop cirrhosis of the liver,
Hmm.
more likely to engage in early promiscuous sexual
Hmm.
behaviors, more likely to use intravenous needles, and the indicators goes on and on and on. So even as we talk and look at adults, what we do know is that those formative and early experience that we sometimes says, oh, it's a part of life, it's a part of the rhythm of life. We experience all of those, but believe it or not, there's in my work, in my crisis management work, they said because the water is calm, it doesn't
Hmm.
mean that the alligator is not under there.
Mm.
And so,
Hmm.
because a person is going along, it doesn't necessarily mean that the trauma and the impact of trauma. And the last thing I will say here is this: there are essentially about 4 types of traumas that we talk about. One is like a one-time event, right? You're walking down the street and you see something, right? You see a car accident or whatever it is. It's a one-time event, but it could really, really knock you down for a very
Hmm.
long time.
Hmm. Hmm.
Another is maybe chronic. And Bessel van der Kolk, in his book, The Body Keeps the Score, and it's one of the 2 books that I would absolutely recommend here tonight. The other being What Happened to You by Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey. But the first one, Bessel van der Kolk, the name of the book is The Body Keeps the Score. And in that book, he talks about soldiers who are exposed to the theater of war. And in that, he says that a person who comes back from war, whether it was Afghanistan or Iraq or whatever it is, or wherever the wars are around the world, and the impact that we know, right? Lots of veterans who are homeless and are abuse substances, and they
Hmm.
have mental PTSD and all of that. But the larger point that I want to make is what Bessel van der Kolk says. So imagine a person who is an adult, a fully functioning adult who has been exposed to war for a relatively short time, and they spend the rest of their lives recovering. Then he pivoted and juxtaposed that against a child who is born into a family that they've experienced all kinds of those abuse ongoingly and on a long-term basis. What are the impacts there are on that child's life? And so from a one-time event, an acute event, to chronic event, to what we sometimes refer to as complex traumas or layered traumas, right? The child who is being abused at home may be bullied at school. The child who is being bullied at school, being abused at home, may have a disability that they're being teased about, and we could go on and on. And then the other is the one that affects Black and brown people, and that is racial trauma of what it means to be Black and brown in the United States, UK, and around the world. That there are just some experiences that are unique to people of color. Racial trauma. As a time I'm invited to some fancy, flown to the Caribbean to be the keynote speaker for some fancy thing. Um, Walked out on the beach, sat down on the chair, and a brother that looks like me said, "Man, get up! You can't sit here." these chairs belongs to the hotel guest. He couldn't in in his mind, he couldn't imagine that
You're
that
not a guest.
that seat belongs to me, or at some fancy a country club my wife and I went to, and I went to refresh my drinks and to get some more, hors d'oeuvres or whatever it was, and the white lady came over to me and give me her glass and her dirty plate and say, go take it to the kitchen,
Hold a
right? Like,
second.
yes,
Hold a
yes.
second. Let me pull up a little bit on that. So what they thought you were, who they thought you were,
Well, it happens often,
the
right?
cleanup guy.
It happens. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
Or walk into a department store and someone, start following you, or
Mm.
like
Oh
those things
yeah, oh
happen.
yeah, oh yeah. They always track you down with that the racial part. Yeah, and
That's
they keep the eyes on your camera. This is what you're doing if you go put something in your knapsack or something.
Yeah. So those are the four types of traumas that, oftentimes that have lasting and deleterious impact on the mind, the body, and the soul.
I'm gonna give my friends, my panel a chance to come in, but you have said so much. You have said so much in the introduction or the outlay of that it blows my mind.
Mm.
Just to, and I wish that they weren't as quick as you say them, so that I could digest a little bit more what I heard you say, because that is more than I could imagine.
Mhm.
I'm wondering. What, I'm trying to see how to phrase this. Dealing with somebody or having somebody with you said with six of these
Mhm.
things, and the profound effect that it will have on their lives. How do you how do you how do you discover how do you discover what one's experiences are, and maybe is that because of behavioral situation, how they behave, or what is it, investigation to find out? How do you make discovery of these things to really reach out and help somebody who in these situations are desperately in need of help, maybe not even knowing how much they need the help?
Yeah. What I would do is I would peel back just a little bit, and as much as I'm a clinician and I teach emerging clinicians at Fordham University and Lehman Colleges, um, but I try not to have a clinical conversation, because, and I'll tell you why. One of the reasons is this: that you don't need to be a clinician to heal. And it's
Right.
it's it's a mantra that I've been running with. You don't need to have advanced degrees in assessments
Mm.
and diagnoses in order for you to heal people. What
Mm.
we do know is that it's, and later on I'll say a couple more things about the brain, and how trauma impacts the brain. And so what my mantra has become is, you don't need to assess people, because most of us are not clinicians to assess people, but what we do need is to treat people right.
Right.
What we do need to do is to demonstrate what Jesus talks about oftentimes, about what it means to show compassion, what it
Mm.
means to show kindness, what it means to not railroad people. How do you demonstrate? How do you use your power against those who have less power? And so we spend a lot of time talking about trauma informed spaces, trauma informed family systems, trauma informed educational systems, trauma informed churches, trauma informed social spaces. And so there's a lot of conversations we have with people on an ordinary daily basis. If I'm in the classroom training university students, those are a small fragment or segment of those that are going to work with trauma people, right? Like they said that the therapeutic is not owned by the therapist, right? Healing is not owned by the therapist. And because those of us who have mothers that has loved us beyond belief, or fathers that would die for us, or sisters that would fight for us. We know that those who make us chicken foot soup when we're sick, those are the people that heal us most, not
Mm.
the therapists. And so I spend more time really talking about really how to heal people. Yeah.
I wasn't even I wasn't when thanks for that. I wasn't even thinking about from the the clinical standpoint of making a discovery or discern or say, okay, I see the signs and the symptoms, but I'm thinking from the general population.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the general population. Do these people who have, for example, six of these
Mm-hmm.
ACEs as you call them, um, are there oftentimes signs and symptoms that one can say there's something about this behavior, something about this action or reaction that is not normal or cause me to question or to wonder if.
Yeah, what I will say first is that, and this is where wanted to go with the conversation. One is that 67% of the general population have at least one. In other words, you and I have
We
some.
all
That's
traumatized.
right. And so, and so the first order of business is not even to pathologize, right? Not is not, and that's really the point, right? Is to say that it's a common, unfortunately. We all have them. We have them as we develop them as adults because of intimate relationships, because of poverty, because of
Wow.
experiences on the job. So most of us have some. We've just learned to survive, right? We are survivors, as they say. We've learned to survive with them. And so the first order of business is to say, it's me. I have experienced it. You've experienced it, and so it's to normalize it, right? To say to not pathologize it, but to say most of the general population, and that was the 67% were the white folks who were, the middle class white folks who were evaluated. Now kick it down to black and brown folks, and that numbers, and there's a subsequent study that was done out in Philadelphia that shows that black and brown folks have a lot more trauma in those indicators than we talked about.
And I'm not surprised on that. I'm not surprised on that because it's sometimes not having food to eat is trauma in itself. Not being able to
Absolutely.
provide for your children, for your family, is trauma and parent. You're not able to take them to doctor when they need to. It's another So yeah, my goodness, my friends, I'm talking with Bishop Roger Ball right now, and this is the panel, and the discussion is geared around how trauma can impact one's life for the duration of one's life. And
Mhm.
so we're pinpointing, he's pinpointing some of those aces, and I wish we had one of those, and we say, okay, this one, because coming back to what you talk about, even how these affects the organs,
Mhm.
even affect your organs, and I don't know that most of us even thought of that. But I'm gonna leave it to the other members of the panel right now to have their little piece, because I've been talking the whole time, because I'm a little bit taken up with what you just presented at the outset of this.
So, what Dr. Ball shared is so important because what I'm thinking of now from the ACEs is sometimes my behavior, other people's behavior. We're not aware that we may have suffered some trauma. And then some of us will say, well, that's just who I am. That's just the way I am.
That's right.
But as you rightfully say, if I'm able to peel back the layers, it's amazing what I'll discover.
Mhm.
Mhm. Mhm.
Mhm.
So, and then from a Christian perspective, one of the things we were talking about earlier, we sometimes think that because you come to Christ,
Mhm.
everything is going to be okay.
Mhm.
how,
The
how,
blood,
how
the
do
blood
we
of Jesus wash away all that, right?
how do we help the and with Pentecostals, as mentioned before, we had an issue before where someone was speaking in tongues running the aisles, and everybody thought it was the Holy Spirit. When we dug a little bit deeper, realized that there was some
Mhm.
traumatic stuff that was happening. How do we help our people to understand that sometimes it is deeper than what we think it is?
Mhm.
And there's a question for Bishop Ball, or
Yeah.
Yes, it's a question.
okay.
Yeah. So, sorry, my brother. I didn't realize it's a question for me. One of the things we do know is one of the things we do know, and I do a lot of presentations on to our faith communities
Right.
on trauma as well. And part of the problem is that and this takes us down a whole nother,
Right.
avenue of conversations. Our faith community in particular, Protestantism and Pentecostalism in particular,
Right.
is that we everything is over spiritualized.
Right.
Spiritualized, man.
And so and I did a series on healing the inner child from one of my really good buddy, Bishop Roberts, down in the Bronx.
Right.
And we land on even something as simple as really engaging in a conversation. Let's not call it generational curse.
Right.
Mhm.
Yes.
Let's call it generational patterns,
Yes.
because not
Yeah.
not
Yep.
everybody knows how
Mhm.
to unbind the spell and turn it around and send it into the pigs or whatever. Right? Not everybody knows how to
Send
do
it
that,
into
and I'm
pigs.
I'm I'm being facetious here just a little bit. But watch this. But watch this. If I know that is intergenerational patterns,
Right.
that over generations we have
Right.
constructed our lives in such a way that when our kids give us trouble, we knock them over the head. We know that, like for some people, when they become stressed and they saw their parents, they turn to the bottles. And it
Right.
becomes some processes that we look, we learn, we absorb, and we lived our lives out in spectacular and amazingly painful ways over generation. If you call that a curse, then we need to find an exorcist. We need to find somebody to kick it out of our system. But
Mhm.
if it's a pattern, and we could begin the lifelong journey of saying, with me, with my kids, we're going to do some things differently. If it was intergenerational that we father kids and we walk away from them, guess what we're going to do? The kids that we have, we're going to stay with them, we're going to nurture them, we're going to raise them, and we're going to be fully present for them. So we could break those intergenerational patterns. And so we have to move away from, and then the last thing I will say is that some things just can't pray away.
Right. Correct.
Some things need
That's exactly
behavioral
where I'm getting at.
change, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Behavioral change and really, really, really hard work, to make shifts. And some of those shifts takes a long, long time. And so we have to be able to, but we have to move away from over spiritualizing everything.
So I usually call those, and I like the patterns. I call them character traits.
Hmm.
Some of them are character traits. Very
Yeah,
good. Thank you.
yeah,
I
Yeah.
really, and Reverend National, we're gonna get you in, but um, I have to, settle a bit on that because we agree, and I think
Yeah.
ignorance has
Of
pervaded
course.
hmm,
Mhm.
our church, and spiritualizing everything, and everything can be moved by the blood of Jesus. We just can't everything we can just call the blood of Jesus because we have the word that tells us. But there are some things that need faith and work.
hmm,
Something that need faith and work. We can all praise faith, but there's something that need work.
yeah,
And I'm not sure how prepared we were with the work part of it to help people to deal with the issues. And we were talking earlier before you came on, that unfortunately some experiences have been stigmatized.
yes,
They have
yes,
been stigmatized, and because of that, people don't are not open
hmm,
to anything, because once they open something, then they are being labeled
hmm,
not spiritual,
Right.
demon possessed,
Right.
not
Correct.
living close to the Lord,
Mm-hmm.
are something messed up with their lives. And our other approach is week after week after week, we're praying and casting out. We're calling the church for prayer and fasting, and we wonder how this demon must be really strong and stubborn, why we can't get him out.
hmm,
Right? Sometimes the person does need
hmm,
a referral to get somebody to talk to, who can say, here is what's going on, here is how we deal with it. And we would have helped a lot more people than we have caused them to. God knows what the end result be.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And part of it, my brother, is, and today I was doing some training, and one of the things that we keep saying is that people have to talk about it. So that's when I celebrate our churches, because there's a scripture, that Revelation, that says, "For we overcome by the blood of the Lamb, but the
Word of
second
our
part is what?
testimony.
By the words of our
Our
testimony.
testimony. Yeah.
And there's a great quote that says, that which we cannot put into words, we cannot put to rest.
Correct.
And so,
Yeah.
where there's shame, there is silence. Where there's
Yeah.
shame, there's darkness. Where there is shame, there's mutism. We
Yes.
become mute. And so, it's liberating, frightening, but liberating when people are able to really talk about it. So, a big part of the work that we have to do is to really find the space to talk about where we've been, what we've been through. And then the second thing I will say is that not only to find the space to talk about it, but for us to be listeners. So you asked what are some things that we can do? We could listen. And because part of it, people who have been through trauma, one of the first things they do is that they blame themselves.
Yeah.
Have
Mhm.
not, and Bishop was mentioning this earlier, offline. But we blame ourselves.
Correct.
Some of you might know she's now 22, my baby girl, my young
Mhm.
adult daughter now, she's 22 now, just graduated college. But when she was 3 years old, 2 years old, she got she we discovered that she had cancer in the liver.
Wow.
When she was 8 years old, my wife and I went to her school for a back to school night. And in her journal at school, you know what that little girl wrote? 8 years old. She said, when I was a baby, I got cancer because I did
Right.
something wrong. She said, because I
Yeah.
did something
Can you
wrong.
imagine?
Could you
Wow.
imagine that?
Wow.
What
Yeah.
should she have possibly done to have
Right.
gotten cancer?
Wow.
Of course, she did nothing wrong, but part of the
Understood.
listening in
Hmm.
that you
Hmm.
discover that we blame ourselves for all kinds
Yeah,
of stuff.
for sure.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
And Bishop, Dr. Ball, thank you so much for what you've shared thus far. And you just said something so profound that, people do blame themselves
Yes.
for, when they have different things happen to them, they blame themselves. And what came to mind as I was listening to you speaking, two things. Number one is this: do people recognize or realize that what they are going through, have gone through, is actually trauma?
Mhm.
Because sometimes it's the norm. Like, Caribbean families, back in the day,
Right.
everybody got beaten, and some got more beatings than others,
Mhm.
they got murdered. We call it
That
murder.
was traumatic.
Murderation.
It's
Murder.
like you went to school and you spoke to a friend and another friend, and it was like, yes, I got beaten last night, but mine was worse than your. And for some, that beaten or whatever was not. It was abuse.
Right.
It was kind of
Yeah.
normalized, and so
Yes.
it's not seen as abuse. But later on in life,
Yes.
that trauma
Mhm.
is kind of playing out in
That's right.
Correct.
relationships, in
That's
Right.
right.
behaviors and attitudes. And another thing I was going to say, Dr. Ball, is, can trauma, well, not can, I think it can be, but you're the professional, can trauma be locked away? So you've got, something's
Mhm.
happened so horrific to someone, and I know this does happen, and it's locked away in the recesses of the brain or the mind, and they don't have no idea. That thing is
Right.
just like oblivious, and then something triggers it.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. So this brings me to sort of the second point, the other piece that I wanted to get to before we get off this
Right.
conversation. So to talk just a little, just a itsy witsy tiny bits of brain science here. So the brain, broadly speaking, there are four sections of the brain, broadly speaking.
Mhm.
At the base of the brain, and Bishop Thompson, you remember we talked a little bit about this in
Yes.
in, in, in our in our couple in our couples retreat. We had like 100 couples at our retreat, and
That's amazing.
we
Yeah.
talk a lot about trauma, because what trauma does, it plays itself out in intimate spaces too.
Correct. Mhm.
And so the way we communicate, the way we fight, all of those things. But so the brain develops in sort of what we call bottoms up development. The first part of the brain to be developed, my sister, is it's called the brain stem. It's like at the back of your
Mhm.
skull, at the very it attaches to the spinal cord, which which is the central nervous system.
Mhm.
But the brain stem, and I'm going to make a point here. So the first part of the brain to be developed is the brain stem. And then the
Mhm.
next part is what they call diencephalon, and is responsible for things like appetite, sleep, so on and so forth. The next part of the brain to be developed is the limbic system. And the limbic system is the basin of our emotions and memories and things like that. So hear this, the last part of the brain to be developed is the cortex or the neocortex, which is like your frontal lobe here. And that's what the part of the brain actually, we're born with it underdeveloped. It's problem solving, it's critical thinking, it's solving mathematical equation, is writing poetry or whatever it is. The part of the brain that is responsive, the first part of the brain that I described, the brain stem, when we're traumatized, guess where trauma lives? Trauma lives in the brain stem.
Yes.
And the brainstem is responsible for autonomic nervous system, heart rate, body temperature, regulation. So if you're driving down the highway and someone cuts you off in a flash, maybe you were listening to some Bob Marley, like really taking it easy, or some classical piano, Bach or Beethoven or something like that, and you're calm, your heart is at rest, and in that instant when you get cut off, your heart rate, your entire system mobilizes for fight, right? You because from a evolutionary and a developmental perspective, the part of the brain that is responsible for survival, we call it a survival mechanism, it activates, right?
Yes.
It activates. So what you're talking about, my sister, is like the trauma fight, the trauma flight, the trauma freeze, the trauma fawn. It all lodges itself at the back of the brain, because with the next time, and this is what the brain tells itself, you hurt me, you abused me, you did all of this thing to me. The brain doesn't know or cares if it's Peter, if it's Paul, if it's Susie, if it's John. All it knows is that I was hurt.
It happened before, right?
It happens before. And if it happens before, it's going to happen again.
Right.
Yeah.
And so even when someone approach you and says, we need to talk, the brain may interpret that as a fight. You'll
Yes.
see that sometimes people go from 0 to 100. You didn't mean to upset them. You trigger them. Sometimes it's smell.
Right.
Sometimes the person who abused them wear a particular cologne, and they're on an airplane, and all of a sudden they pass the person that wears the same cologne. And this is what the brain does. It grabs them
Trigger
and
something.
it drags them through the decades, through the years, through time and space, and it brings them right back to the place where that abuse took place, because the brain is wired to prepare for what has happened. I want to say it again. The brain is wired to prepare for what happened before.
Yeah.
This is an incredible discussion, and this is an enormous amount of information, and creating an awareness. It is almost overwhelming for me to absorb all of this, because it is so real, and I can see real life in this. And before the bishop comes on, my question is, Bishop Ball, how do we deal with this, or things like these? How do we deal with them? Is there therapy, counseling? What mechanisms are there for us to help some of us?
Yeah.
I mean, all of us need help one way or the other, but some of us are more dire than others.
Correct.
Yeah. And some of us have been through more, and it has less impact. Some has been through less, and it has great
More
impact.
impact. Yeah.
Tolerance level, what you
That's
can,
right. Stress tolerance. One of the stories that I tell is that I was when I was a younger man. I used to say when I'm a young man, and my wife used to tell me, "You're still relatively young."
Underscore relatively.
Relatively. When I was a younger man, I was driving out where in Bishop Thompson's neck of the woods out there in New Jersey. I was on the Garden State Parkway, and I was driving to work. And as I was driving on the Garden State Parkway, an 18-wheeler sauntered over and just hit my car, and the car just kept spinning in the middle of the highway, kept spinning, like one of those. Eventually, I was able to bring the car under control, and the car was facing in the opposite direction, the oncoming traffic, that is. And the car was pretty, traffic stop. The car was pretty, messed up, and I was banged up pretty badly. The ambulance came, they towed the car away, and they took me to Hackensack Medical Center. I'll never forget it. It's as though it was yesterday.
Right.
I made one call. So you talk about like healing.
Mm-hmm.
I made one call. And the way I put it is like this. It's as though that one call I made, the entire Bronx emptied out. Entire Westchester, my nieces, my nephews, my sister, my brother, my sisters, my brothers, my wife, my in-laws, everybody. There was no. If I said there's no room in the inn.
Right.
There was no room in the waiting room
Right.
because they came for me. So when we talk about trauma, we talk about the event or the series of event.
Right.
We talk about the experience, how it is internalized, and then we talk about, and that's the CDC, and then we talk about the effect, the lasting effect. That day when I met into that terrible accident, the way my brain processed the event has a lot to do with what happened right after.
Right.
That my family showed up for me.
Yeah. Right.
Trauma settles in
Mhm.
deeper and more lasting and recurring, and PTSD and all of those things, because oftentimes when people experience trauma, they don't get the necessary support.
Right.
And so a big part of recovery is really when life happens, right? When, like when Job, when he lost everything, his friends gathers. Somebody said, "Did you hear what happened to Job? Did you hear? We got to go see him. We
Mm.
got to go see him. We got to go see." They didn't say everything that was right, but they said we got, and they packed up their bags and they traveled on their donkeys and their Rolls Royces or whatever they were driving. But they migrated from wherever they were, and they sat down with him in silence, and they talked and they listened, but they showed up. And so a big part of recovery is when people know for sure that they are not alone, that they are not
Right.
going through it alone.
Mm.
Good point, and I'm gonna give it to everybody to come in. Then on the opposite side of that, on the opposite side of that, um, it minimizes or mitigates the long term effect when you have the kind of support. Um, uh, on the other hand, somebody who lives in a traumatic situation, and like Reverend Dashana was talking about, you're being constantly abused
Mhm.
by the same person in the same environment, and you gotta suck it up by yourself, go in a corner, not to be seen or heard, and the next time it happens again, that's a whole different um experience. uh how do well, I don't know if I'm asking too many how, but what would you say to somebody who that is their experience, that doesn't have the kind of support and the outlet or the people to say I'm loved and cared for? Look, there's so many well wishers that it takes my mind off, at least temporarily, off the situation, so it mitigates it. How do you deal with somebody who has lived in that, isolated by themselves, and has to face it over and over again?
Yeah, and that's why we need escape hatch, right? Those a person who's living in, and my colleagues could jump in as well on that, but we sort of need a way forward. And one of the things that trauma does, and one of the participants in my training this afternoon, um, that made the point that saying that trauma really short circuits the brain.
Right.
It's as though your future is foreclosed, but it's not,
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
Like when you're in, I believe is Pavlov who did the what they call classical conditioning.
Mhm.
And what he did was he took it, and I'm sorry to use a animal, a metaphor, but I think it gets the point home. He put dogs in cages, and shocked them, and shocked them, and shocked them, and after a while they stop moving. They give up hope, they lose hope. And then you know what they did? They opened the cages, um, but continue to shock them. And you know what those dogs would do? They actually stay
It's
there.
there. Stay in the cave. Yeah.
And sometimes we've just been so beaten down
Mm.
that we forget that there's a way out.
Mm.
And that's why we need each other. Every now and then you need someone
Mm.
to say, there, look, there's a North Star, there's a morning star, there is a way out, there's a way forward. I have been there, I've seen it, I know what you're going through. Come, let me help you. And that's overly simplified. But what I do
Mm.
know, and I've seen it in faith communities, someone who is in a very, terrible situation, and the others gather around them and says, you know what, we're gonna shelter you. We're going to create an escape plan for you.
Yeah.
But oftentimes you don't do it alone. Sorry, go ahead, my sister.
I was going to say there's two experiences myself I can relate to. I think Bishop Woodrow mentioned earlier about the onion. Growing up, I was one that suffered with low self-esteem, lack of confidence, and there was just so much. And going back, looking back at it, and peeling back the onion, Bishop Woodrow. I was one that used to wet the bed,
Right.
and as a result of that, that came with punishment and so forth, and that affected. I didn't realize that it was trauma.
Right.
It was just what happened. And as I grew up, I didn't know why. I was because I spoke a lot. People thought, oh, because she's, that was my mechanism.
Right.
But behind all of that, there was something going on until I got and became an adult and started to look back. Where's this lack of confidence, low self-esteem? Where's it all coming from? And it was like going back, and I did like a self-development course, and having that course, going back and like peeling the onion, Bishop Woodrow. It's like, okay, I could see where the root of all that came from, and so the trauma that I experienced, I was able to understand where it came from, and then was able to deal with it, and confront it, and have that conversation with whoever, and get to a place where I understood what happened and why it happened, and that was part of my healing. And the second thing you said about the community, when my daughter passed away, like I said earlier on, it will be 2 years September coming, and my friend, I've got some bona fide girlfriend. I'm married, and I have my husband, I've got my children and grandchildren, and two of my girlfriends, when we left the hospital that Saturday evening, they just went to their houses, got Bishop, they packed their bags, and they moved in. They just moved in. Me and my husband didn't ask no question. They didn't say, this is what the Bishop, they were here for, I don't know, right up to the funeral. After the funeral, they were here. So the support, like you said, of having people around you in times of trauma for me was so important, and the support to help me through that trauma. But I want to ask a question, Bishop Roger. How long, Bishop, here we go, give it the how. How long does it take for one to get to the place where they can say they're over trauma, or do they ever get to that place?
Yeah, it's a really, really good. That's an excellent question. And first, our condolences on the loss of your daughter. It's a great question, my sister. And what we do know, I'll say a couple of things. What we do know, and thank you so much for that really powerful story that your friends
moved in.
they moved in, and that's why I love scripture.
And she had nothing to do with it. She couldn't stop them.
This is out of your control, right? Yeah. You don't control this.
They took over my phone. They took my phone, the door. They took over. But I'll let you carry on, sir.
Yeah, no, I want to hear more.
They took over. I didn't answer my telephone, my mobile phone. They cooked. They organized. My husband was here, My husband was here. But my girlfriends, they just took over everything and allowed me just to sit in that space
Yeah.
of
Right.
of
Right.
grief and mourning
Yeah.
with everybody coming around. People were coming around, but they took care of everything.
Yeah.
And I just want to
They
thank
don't
them.
want you to worry about anything,
No,
to be concerned
nothing.
about something. Just grieve, just grieve, just
Just
grieve.
breathe. Yeah, Bishop. Yeah.
My sister, I could cry just listening to the story
Yes.
because I know what you're talking about. I know what
Mhm.
you're talking about. And tomorrow, that's what I'm going to talk about tomorrow with this 3-day intensive training with clinicians. That's exactly what I'm going to talk about, how community heals.
Yeah.
And I told them I'm sick and tired of talking. Well, I'm not sick and tired, but I talk to the clinicians all the time and I train clinicians about how to respond. But I'm after the community, like what you just talked about. Those
Mm,
people, and I don't know who they are, but there's a good chance that they're not therapists.
Yeah.
They they love you.
Mhm.
That's what it
mm,
is. They
mm,
love you, and so those are the when I mentioned it before, relationships that heal. That's exactly what it is. That
Right.
you know that you because if you were locked away in your suffering
Mhm.
by yourself,
Mhm.
the recovery period would have been longer.
If
mm,
The
if you
suffering,
do,
that's right. If you
if you
do,
do, yeah,
it,
right.
but you now having people in your space to that you could weep in. Some days you feel better, some days you're
Right.
laughing and
Right.
talking to them,
Right.
some, and other days you're a mess. and
Yeah.
mm,
and it
Mhm.
was okay for you to be all of those things all at once with all of those people.
mm,
So in
Right.
terms of your question about how long, it really depends on the individuals. I want you to think about, like, some people when they're mad for a long time. Some
Right.
people, you don't want them to be mad at you because when they're mad at you, they take a long,
That's
long
it.
time to let it go. And some people, they tend to move on relatively quickly.
Right.
In other times, like, I mean, think about what you talked about, like going back, what we call autobiographical rehabilitation. You talk about being young and some of those negative experiences that you had as a child, and it wasn't until you became an adult that you really said, you know what, I'm reclaiming my
Right.
life.
Right.
mm,
I'm going back and I'm going to look. I did a workshop recently, and this brother, he talks about that his parents would, whomever would tie him up on the bed and
Wow.
beat, like when he sleep, tie him down, stretched out
mm,
legs,
Wow.
arms stretched out, and beat him. And he talked about being a, like they said he was a bad kid. And
Yeah.
I stopped him. I said, I don't care how bad you were.
Right.
There's nothing you could have
Correct.
humanly done
Correct.
mm,
Correct.
mm,
that would have warranted someone, anybody, I don't care who it is, strapping your arms and legs down
mm,
and beating you to a pulp.
Yeah. Yeah.
mm,
What did you break? What vase did you break? Like, did you eat out extra food? Did you steal $20? Like, what could you not, right? There's nothing
Right.
you possibly could have done. And so
mm,
part of it is he had to reconcile with this idea that I wasn't a bad child.
Mhm.
I
mm,
didn't do anything wrong. And I didn't do anything wrong why this happened. That was on the part of the abuser, not the abused. And you
Right.
only continue to hurt yourself by taking responsibility for something that someone else done. So how long? It depends on all kinds of things.
Yeah.
It may
Mhm.
take longer because not only that you've dealt with that, but through the years you've dealt with many more things. And
mm,
trauma doesn't sit like in different rooms in your life.
Right.
Trauma sits in one room
Right.
and
mm,
it piles on
Yeah.
top of. There's not some over there and some over here and some
mm,
behind there. The way
mm,
trauma lives, it sits on top of each other. It becomes layered. And so the more we have, it's like when we deal with death, like when we talk about, the
Mhm.
loss of someone,
Mhm.
those who are still like, and again, you lost your child, but the
Yes.
person who have lost had multiple losses in
Right.
a
mm,
relatively short time is going to take much
Yeah.
longer to recover because what happened 3 years ago or 4 years ago and then 2 years later, it sits on top of each other and makes it even that much more difficult. And then you
mm,
have other things like your friends who showed up for you, whether it's
mm,
therapy or your church family or your biological family, that shows up and provides support for you.
mm.
So those are all some of the few variables that really impact how long it takes for some folks to recover. And you know that and I'll say one more thing. You know that you're in a better place when you can talk about it and your body doesn't
Right.
respond. You could talk about it and you talk about it as a memory,
Mhm.
something that happened, rather than it dragging you back and reliving it in the moment. And a big part of the work that people like me do is to help people to retell the story like what you did, retelling a story in such a way that no longer blames yourself and says these people, they, I love them, but there's something sick about what happened, right? There's, and that had nothing to do with me. It had everything to do with them.
So, Dr. Beckford, we want to thank you for inviting us because this is powerful stuff. I mean, to listen to Ashana share her story and Dr.
Yeah.
Ball. But from a minister's perspective, one of the things that is gripping my heart is that sense of community, that sense of family, because we're part of the church family. Dr. Ball mentioned, I remember when I pastored in Canada, a lady one day got very upset at me to the point that she wanted to beat me up, man. Because I told her no. She asked me something, and I said, no, we're not going to do that.
Yeah.
And later on, she took me in the office and she apologized. She said, my husband has been doing that to me for years, telling me no. She said, for a split second, I saw my husband in you.
Mm.
I say that because it's good for us ministers to be aware and to learn these things because it will help us to become more compassionate, more understanding when we see some of the behaviors. I think I have an idea, and here's the how question again, Bishop Beck. How do we help, especially leadership, lay leaders, to be understanding of what we're talking about? Because all of us suffer from trauma, and it's a large part of the church. And then helping them to understand so that we can be compassionate
Yeah.
and loving and be a community of people when they exhibit these things, their traumatic experiences.
Yeah. I think it's a great question. Another great question. And and I've spent the last 3 years really, because I'm doing so much of this work inside public
Right,
education and in the non-for-profit world.
right.
When the Lord spoke to me to say, really, you need to do this work, but
Yes,
don't forget the church.
right,
Don't forget the church. So as much as I'm doing it in many other spaces,
right.
I insisted, and the Lord said to me, you have to do it first. So I've done a lot of this work for our faith community. And
Good.
like one simple thing that we really think about is, pastors have a lot of power.
Yes.
We have a lot of power.
Mhm.
And people come to us who have all kind of brokenness.
Right,
People come to us who are used to the person in their lives that have the power usually abuse them.
right.
And so when people come to us who are vulnerable, something like I may ask you to do something and
Hmm.
you don't want to do it. I
Right.
should be okay with you saying, no, I
No.
don't want to
Yes.
lead your praise and worship. I don't I don't want to read your scripture. I don't want to, I don't want to do your
You're
ushering.
not being a good Christian.
That's right. We begin to shame them, right?
Yes.
Or
Yes.
when people come to us, like even things like in our sexuality and in
Right.
our
Mhm.
conduct, things like boundaries, and and when folks come to us to make sure that we're not overstepping our boundaries, all of those kinds of things. There's so many things that we can do. Like some people come to our churches and we're ready to hug them. Don't touch
Yeah.
me. You don't
Yes.
know,
That's
like
true.
you don't know
Yeah.
where we've been. You don't know
Mhm.
what people have
Mhm.
been through. You don't know
Yeah.
that their body has been reduced to someone
Yeah.
else's pleasure.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so when they like back up and they say
Yeah.
like men and
Yes.
women, back
Mhm.
up. I don't want you to all be upon me.
So
And we
no
become
greet you with a holy kiss.
that's right. we, we, we become offended and we take it personally, and some of these things we just shouldn't. You don't need to take it
Yeah.
sometimes you want people to go sit up front, and you have those ushers who will, they're like
Yeah, yeah,
bouncers.
drag them here, right?
Oh
That's
yeah.
what, ushers have become bouncers in some of our churches. And if you either you sit, either you sit here or you sit here. And it's okay if a person says, I don't want to go sit in the
Right.
front seat.
Right.
Like it's okay.
Leave them
Don't
alone. Leave them alone.
leave
Leave them
God be like
alone.
leave yeah, like
We're
leave
glad you're here.
that's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
We're glad
Yes.
you're here.
Yes.
So I mean, this is one of the healthiest conversations that we've had. on Truth Matters, and I mean, because it is so relatable in so
Yeah.
many ways to
Yeah.
all of us. Now, I'm not gonna tell my story to follow up with Reverend Ashana, but she lost her daughter. I lost my son.
Wow.
And the strangest thing
Wow.
is, I won't tell the story right now because it's a long story, but the question, Bishop, is well, number one, for my last son, I was the one who had to go tell my wife and
Wow.
my two other sons
It's difficult.
about the report that I went to my office and get a police call on my office when I'm should even been at my office. I get a call on my office, a message to and to come and from Rochester to New York City. Police apparently maybe didn't know the distance between and just left a message, can you come down? When I called back the officer, I said, it is your son. It's a strange story that one of these days I'll write it and I'll talk about it somewhere. But I realized that I was protecting everybody.
Right.
I was protecting everybody because I knew the impact it was going to have on them. My wife, I was protecting my wife and my two sons, and I never dealt with it. And I noticed that my wife, on the other hand, I thought she would not live. Literally, I thought she would die, physically die. Somehow God had grace and were preparing her for some reason. When she looked back, she realized He was preparing her for this traumatic moment. But she found release because she kept talking about him. She never stopped talking. Everybody, sometimes I felt, oh my God, can she just take a break and stop talking? but everybody she talks to, that's all she talked about.
Right.
And I think God uses a mechanism to help her to survive.
Right.
For me, Bishop, that happened in 2004. 2019. When I was doing my chaplaincy residency. If you binge do chaplaincy and you know that you have to visit all the hospitals and you got to visit the rooms and you got to write a report of what the experience, you got to do a presentation of what the experience was and where you were in the experience. I noticed after a while, every time, almost everywhere I go to talk to somebody, they have lost a child. Wow. And when I write my report, my supervisor and my classmates, they're asking, Orville did a great report on what happened, but where was Orville?
That's right.
Right? Where were you? We don't see you. We don't see you and hear you in the thing. Where were you in this? Dealing with it as, so it seemed like I've been shunning, not putting myself in the position. And they kept asking me, where were you? And one day my supervisor decided to have a conversation with me. And I was having a one-on-one with her. And I gave the detail because they're saying, why are you getting all of these people and you writing all these reports and we don't find you in there? And I talked to my supervisor and the conversation led to me bawling like a baby. in the office one-on-one, I bawl like a baby.
Yeah.
And that's when it seemed like I was able to deal with it.
Right.
And to face it realistically. It has not gone away because everyone is like, seem like, is this real or not real?
Right.
Yes.
On the other hand, my last son, it took him 11 years.
Wow.
11 years to even talk about it.
Right.
He would not want to have a discussion. No, he don't want to hear his brother's name called, don't want to be there. He couldn't deal with it. And one day when he left Albany, like 4:30 in the morning, drove down to our house, 11 years after, drove down to New York where we were in Yonkers, came in the house, had keys, just opened our door, came in our bed, laid down between his mother and myself. He was what, maybe how many years ago that? He must have been like, my brother died when he was about 14. That was 11 years, so about 25 now.
Right.
25. came in and lay down in the bed between the both of us, and he wept.
Yeah. Yeah.
He wept,
Mm.
and he talked about his brother.
Mm.
11 years.
Mm.
11 years.
Wow.
Locked up.
Wow.
School affected him in college. He did very well, but psychologically and
Yeah.
emotionally it affected him. And he's still dealing with it now, but he
course.
got relief
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
these things don't erase from your mind,
Yeah.
because every
Yeah.
now and then it pops up like it's
Yeah.
still fresh.
Yeah.
But
Wow.
as you say, we're all traumatized.
Yes. Yeah. We are.
Some of us worse than others.
Yes. Yeah.
Strange enough that before my son lost my son, I went to a funeral up in Rochester, and there was a father who was burying his son, and he bawled like a baby at that funeral, and he was saying, "This not supposed to happen. This not supposed to. I'm not supposed to bury my son. My son's supposed to bury me." And a short while after, it was my time.
Yeah.
But talking about community, it was bad weather. It was January up in Rochester. Okay, and I remember our friend Owen Martin, got a company and drove up from Bronx to Rochester in as bad as weather as you could get to come officiate the funeral of my son.
Right. Amen.
You know, and so when you talk about community to help you to heal or to relieve you of some of the pressure, we all need community, and unfortunately sometimes that's what lacking. And talk about the you talk about the how community can heal. We all need each other.
Yes.
And we're going through trauma now so frequently, and I said this over and over again. One of the good things about God and how he deals with us as a church community is that he doesn't allow us all to have the same experience at the same time.
That's true.
Right? He always allows some of us to be available and able to provide a shoulder that some can lean on.
I want to jump in here and say something, just a point of observations, and I think it's important for us to note it.
Yes.
What you talk about, and Bishop, thank you so much for sharing your story. And what an amazing conversation.
Yes.
What an amazing healing conversation.
Oh, yes.
And so I'll say this, excuse me, is that, and there's a book that I was reading probably, a little while ago, and sitting someplace in my office. Men and women oftentimes respond to loss and trauma very differently.
Correct. Yes.
Our sisters live longer than we do.
Yes.
More often than not.
Yes.
Because, and I love what you said about my good friend Lady Beckford, is that our sisters generally spend more time when bad things happen. Our sisters turn to community, turn to each other. Us brothers, we tend to lock ourselves away. Because from our childhood growing up, in fact, if we talk too much about our suffering, we're told that we're girls,
Girls,
man,
grow up.
That's right. Take it like a man. Take it like a man. And so when the rug is completely pulled from under our feet and we fall flat, there's no sounding board. Our heads become echo chambers, and we live in an isolating space. Whereas your wife, your wife might have recovered her continuum, her trajectory, looked very differently, and was healthier in some ways. But we grieve the way we grieve, right?
Right.
But make absolutely no mistake about it. Her talking to any and everybody that would listen, that puts her way ahead.
Of course.
Yours took 15 years by calculation, is what we just talked about. Your son, 11 years. Your wife, right? She was talking about it, and that's why we need to give permission.
Yes.
I want my brothers who suffer to break down and bawl, Bishop Thompson. I want for us to break down and bawl and find someone's arms to weep in, and to talk about it, and to to question whether, and not to blame ourselves and things like that, because in the end, we're less likely to suffer heart attacks, we're less likely to develop diabetes, we're less likely to develop high blood pressure, we're
Wow.
less likely to die early deaths. And that's what
Wow.
all the research shows, that
Right.
those intervention, believe, look, that's when I said we overcome by the words of our testimony. I'm not just talking about, oh, hallelujah.
Yeah.
I'm talking about that our world
Yes.
are made better and our lives become more meaningful and we live longer because we decide to talk about what has happened.
A few things. One is we need to create safe spaces
That's right.
where people can do that. Two is one of the things I observed about Job's friend, for the first week, they didn't say a word.
Mhm.
When they opened their mouth is when they blew it.
That's right.
Exactly.
So we
Exactly.
need to know that there are times we just need to be there for people.
Yes.
You don't have to, you don't have to always have a word.
Mm-hmm.
Just being there is word enough.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to understand that in the faith community, we all need it. We all need it because we're going to go through something that is traumatic for all of us.
Yes.
I'm going to pinpoint two things that Bishop, two things for the Bishop, if I can draw them back. One is we don't have to always say something,
Yes.
because sometimes nothing you say
Yes. Yes.
really help. You can make things worse and not better.
That's true.
So presence, and
Yeah.
that's one of the key elements of a chaplaincy.
Right.
Is the power of presence.
Yes.
And sometimes we try to fix things. You don't have to fix things because
Yeah.
you don't know how to fix it. You just need to be there. I tell you what one compassionate sister, one compassionate church sister said to my wife that she has not gotten over up to now.
Yep.
She said to her, "At least you have two more."
Oh, geez. Oh, my goodness. Is that supposed to minimize my pain?
That's what Job said. Miserable comforters you are. Miserable comforters you are, right? So sometimes, and we need to know this. We need to know this, that you're not required to fix anything.
Right.
You just need to show you care, and you love and you care and you want the best for the person. And the most profound way in doing that, Bishop, is by presence, being there. You don't need an answer, because sometimes they're asking you for an answer, and sometimes we think we need to give an answer or need to help something out, and that's where sometimes we make bad worse. Bishop, and I think I see my pastor over here in St. Vincent in the chat. Right, my pastor should be on the panel. She's in the chat right here, but we know the circumstances happen. But somebody asked a question: what do you do when there is no community?
There has to be. Well, I'll step back and let the other folks.
I think someone mentioned that you can also create your own community, right? If you're not part of a church group, they're talking about the people in your life, like you were mentioning, the people who showed up for you. So they're saying not necessarily the church community, but also other people in your life.
Right.
Like you said, Dr. Ball, when you're in the hospital, people showed up, family showed up, friends showed up. Bishop Beckford, you had your minister friend drive up from New York, come up and, creating community.
Yeah, so if you don't have one, create one.
Yeah,
because everybody needs somebody sometime. No man is an island.
Can I just say this though?
Yes.
If we step back and we really think about that question, right?
Right.
Think about that question. What if you don't have community?
Right.
If you don't have community, it shows that you are in the danger zone.
Correct. That's true.
If you don't have community, it means that you're not in a good place. And I want to say that as kindly as possible.
Yeah.
And I was out in New Jersey at one of Bishop Thompson's it might have been your convention. Your convention.
Was a convention, yes.
Your convention, and I made a point of saying when Adam was in the garden,
yes,
the birds were chirping, and all of the whales were
Right.
wailing, and the cows were mooing.
The
Yeah.
wheels were wailing.
Yes, right.
They're making sounds.
That's right, right. And everybody was doing their stuff with their own right. They were doing their
Right.
stuff with their own somebodies, and there was Adam
Right.
alone, alone, walking the virgin soil, the brand new world,
Right.
walking by himself. And God saw him, and God said,
This isn't good.
it's
Not
not
good,
good.
man. Not good,
And
man.
what we've done is we've reduced it to human sexuality.
Correct. Correct.
It's
That
a
is so true.
it's
Yeah.
actually a big mistake to start there.
It is.
Mhm.
It is.
I think we should go there, but I don't think that's where we start.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And when God said it is not good for him to be alone, wasn't conversation that conversation wasn't a sexual conversation.
No, it wasn't.
It's a narrowness of our mind. That's
Well, God Himself is in community.
That's right. It says, "Let us."
yeah.
And so, and so this idea of it's not good for him to be alone.
Right.
What it tells you is that I make the case that Adam could not have survived in that
Correct.
vast and spacious world
Agreed.
by
Agreed.
himself. And so God says, let us create a community
Yes.
for him.
Yeah.
And so the person who's saying, what if there's no community? When I meet with people like in the middle of suffering, when bad things happen, one of the first questions, Trauma Informed 101, Social
Mhm.
Work 101, Psychology 101, this is how the question goes. After you leave here now,
Mhm.
who are you going to be able to talk to when you get home?
Right. Right.
That's a basic as question as it gets,
Yes.
because we want to make sure that, so if a person is saying, what if there's no community? You are on the margins of something not good.
Danger
because-
zone, as you say,
yeah.
the danger zone.
Yeah, because all of us need community.
Yeah.
We need community for people to dance with us on our birthdays, to
Yeah.
sing with us on our anniversary, to clap with us when we get a job promotion. But we also need community to hold us. And just one more thing to what my sister indicated. And she didn't say, and Bishop Thompson talked about Job's friends blew it when they opened their mouth.
Yeah, right.
My sister did not say one thing with what her friends said to her.
Correct.
In the conversation she told,
Yep. They
she didn't
moved
say.
in.
That's right. She didn't say what they said. She said what they did.
Did. Yeah.
And that's the presence that we talk about. In
Amen.
Presence.
fact, if during our tragedies and our traumas, I'm going to say this, it's likely that if you remember what somebody said, they said the wrong thing.
Correct.
Wow.
Just like Bishop mentioned his
Because that goes into that bad place in the back of your head.
Yeah. Dr. Ball, can I ask a question? And it's something to do with what Bishop Woodrow was on about the church dealing with trauma. I think that's what you was referring to, Bishop Woodrow. And you said something, Dr. Ball, about men taking longer, if that's the right word to put it,
Right.
expressing grief or
Yeah.
or not just grief, but dealing with trauma.
Right.
So the question then that comes to my mind then, if the majority of our pastors are male, the majority are male, and so if the pastors themselves are dealing with trauma, have trauma, and not even understanding they're going through trauma, then how can they then be in a position to help others who are going through trauma? If that makes sense, it makes any sense.
Makes
It does.
sense.
It
Yeah.
does. And there is a Dr. Martin. I should remember her name. Bishop Thompson, you'll remember. Bishop Martin's in the Caribbean
Yes.
presbyters,
Yes. Yes. Mhm.
a wife. She actually has done some research in her doctoral studies
Mhm.
about pastors' wives. And watch this. You know what her research has been on? Um, Wives who are left behind after
Yes.
the death of their husband. And it's
Right.
actually something that we don't talk enough about, that a lot of our pastors' wives are having to bury their husbands,
Yes.
because on an average, men tend to die before women,
Correct.
and all that that means. But maybe some more studies need to be done about the mental, emotional, spiritual, physical, psychological health of those who serve, right? Of those who serve. And so, absolutely, I work in a field where my staff, we are exposed to other human beings suffering constantly. And one of the things I intentionally do, like I may have a staff that have to go and support the death of this person or the death of that person, and I'm always so try to be so intentional. If that person has been in it, um I try to pull them out, give them some time of rest back in the office, try to think about how I move around resources. Because what we do know is that pastors are frontline workers. Pastors are dealing with the conflict. They're dealing with all of the human suffering, the expected death, the unexpected death, and sometimes are pulled in so many. And rarely does anyone ever ask, so how are you doing?
Yeah.
how
Mhm.
how are you
Mhm.
doing?
Mhm.
And trauma seeps in. It seeps in ways that you don't think. Sometimes you think
Right.
you're rustic and you're tough, and oh, I've been doing this a long time. But like Terence the African philosopher says, I am human, and there's nothing human that is alien to me. The
Right.
second thing, as I say, is that, and I'm going to put this in very simple terms, like when you're sitting at a table and somebody yawns, like, what
Right.
happens to everybody else around the table?
Start
Beyond
Start
you.
yawning.
yawning.
That's right. Because the way our brains are wired, what scripture says, rejoice with them that rejoice and weep
Mm.
with them, yawn with those who yawn. Our brains are wired to see and to respond and to absorb the sufferings of others. So even when we think we're not affected, we go home and we yell at our wives and our husbands. We go home and we kick the dogs, and we go home and and it terrorizes our nightmares, and we lack sleep. So it's with us, and we have to recognize it and take care of ourselves.
I think one response to that question also from my experience is, even though we're mentioning that men respond differently and most of our pastors are men,
Mm.
I think somehow the Lord, Dr. Ball even covers it, allows us to be able to minister to people who are going through these things. One of the things I've learned, and by the way, that's why training for pastors are so
Mhm.
important.
Mm.
That's why this is so good.
Mhm.
And that's why I don't have to necessarily go to seminary to know this. I'm a reader. I love to read.
That's right.
I love to educate myself. But back to the point, I've come to realize that when you're really called to do what you're doing, God has a way of enabling you.
Amen.
Not only have you prepared yourself, listen to Bishop Beckford, the experiences he had been through, and even you, Sister Shauna. God brings people in your life because of the experiences you've been through. So the experiences we've been through, God has a way of using them. One of the things I was taught in seminary that is powerful is, let's say someone loses a loved one and I'm on my way to visit them, to comfort them. One of the things I've learned is God is already there.
Mhm.
I need to trust him that he's already there. And as I'm going, he's going with me. And I'm his servant, and he's able to enable me, whether it is to just be silent and just make sure presence is there, but never underestimate how powerful God is in
Mm.
using all of us when the time warrants. You ever been called to do something and you feel like you can't do it, and man, I don't want to do it. And when you're over, you're just amazed because God enabled you.
Yes.
I think God has a way of doing that at times.
Amen, amen, my friend. This we're having a conversation of how trauma can affect one's
Yeah.
life for the duration of one's life, depending on how early the trauma happens.
Mhm.
And we're having some real contribution to this conversation. Somebody said this should go on till midnight.
No.
Um,
No, Dr. Ball has to go to work.
yeah, we're not, no. I'm just saying what somebody said.
I'm just teasing.
But I promise you, that I will get Bishop Ball back, because this is my friend, and because I'm thinking, this is so rich,
Yes, it is.
so edifying,
Mm.
so eye opening.
Yes.
It's creating this awareness
Mhm.
that we can deal with some things if
Right.
we're in the right atmosphere.
Correct.
in a proper community.
Correct.
And I want to just piggyback a little bit on the pastors thing, because I was just thinking that sometimes the pastor is traumatized by the church.
Of course.
So sometimes the church traumatizes the pastor too. Sometimes,
That is true.
not only that the pastor is dealing with other people's trauma, but sometimes the church traumatizes the
Of
pastor.
course.
And sometimes, and number one, the pastors need to be equipped, which we a vast majority of us didn't consider this kind of equipment necessary.
Correct.
We think of, I need to prepare for preach. Right, so I need my Bible so I can prepare to preach. But to study human behavior, the psychological, the mental, the emotional, the spiritual, the full human, most of us didn't do that. We just think that, you're just okay, we're gonna do everything spiritually, and so that's why some of us just pray out everything and pray over everything and anoint some things with oil and think that gonna reverse it or remove it, which we really need to be able to sit down and have a conversation with people and know how to respond to things as they come up. So that's one of the problems that we have. The other thing is that pastors in some communities, some churches, don't have a community.
Correct.
They are the one-man band and they deal with the issues of the church, but they don't have nobody to talk to.
Well, studies show pastors are some of the loneliest people around.
The loneliest people, of course, because sometimes again, Bishop Ball can attest to that sometimes it's driven by our own ego.
Yes.
And our own self-protection.
Yeah.
Because we don't want anybody to know that we don't know this, no figure how to understand this, and we don't want to empty or pour out where we are. So we suck it up. And again, come back to you, Bishop Ball. One of the reasons my thinking is, and based on the ACEs that you talked about earlier,
right?
I think some of those affect our own organs, how we survive. Some of us blood pressure is too high. Some of us don't get no sleep, and we develop diabetes, and we develop all these cholesterol. I mean, all of these things happen, and unfortunately, some of us pray about them and don't see our doctors regularly to find out that what's going on either. So there are a number of things that are causing the men to die, sooner than the woman, especially in the pastoral work. And back to what you said, the woman, sometimes we think them talk too much, and then we talk too little. But we also understand that from a medical standpoint, the women think from both sides of the brain, and as fast as they think, so they talk. And they bring release to themselves. We think of only on the left side, and we pack up everything, and we develop a combustion chamber that eventually explode at some point, and then we're gone. This is one of the most important conversations that we have had, and I don't even know where we go from here.
Let me just say just one thing, just quickly. Dr. Warren Petty in my own district did some his doctoral studies is really on things like supervision for pastors, training and development. So we have some scholars in our faith community that is beginning to really sound the alarm to say that we need to do better with things like supervision and retreat in the fall. I'm going to be in a couple of Caribbean islands, really running some retreats for pastors. Pastors feel guilty when they take vacation.
Correct.
The church can't be so weak, and I'm going to say it, that and you can't have so much control that to leave 2 weeks to go rest, relax, and repose and come back, that you think everything is going to fall apart. And so you need to rest and take vacation.
Well, here's what I learned.
Not my church.
If you're a pastor and you can't leave and everything goes well, you have a problem.
Not my church. As a matter of fact, when I'm gone, I think they do a lot better than when I'm gone.
That's my point.
Can I ask a final question probably not final, but a question to Dr. Ball then, in terms of church and ministry in dealing with trauma or approaching the subject of trauma, what would you say would be a way forward for the church? I know you talked about you doing I don't know, retreats and so on for pastors and so on and so forth, which is great. But on a local ground level, grassroots level, then how then do we begin as a church to start to embrace or approach the topic of trauma within the church? Does it need a ministry, or does it need, what does it need in terms of us beginning to address this on a grassroots level?
Sister Shauna, you just asking all of these great questions. I mean,
great questions.
All these great questions. You're gonna, well, first of all, you're gonna bring Bishop Thompson and I to London to answer that question.
West Midlands.
West Midlands. Thank you.
So all right, all of us decide to leave me behind. You want to let me? You want to leave me traumatized behind? He want to leave me traumatized behind.
All right. We're taking you to the West Midlands with us. We're taking you to. So one of the things I'll say, my sister, is this, right? One of the things I'll say is that the CDC, and we don't have time to pull it up, but the CDC talks about trauma-informed principles.
Right.
Let me just give me like 30 seconds, 10 seconds. Trauma-informed principles.
Why don't I let you find out? I'm take a break, and when I come back, you pick up on that.
Okay.
All right, my friends, hang in there. We're gonna take a little bit of break and come right back on the conversation. Stay with us.
Presents Truth Matters. Join the Truth Matters panel for discussion on issues of the times with host Dr. Orville Beckford Sr. and his panel consisting of Bishop Ishmael Charles,
Minister Ashana Knight, Bishop Woodrow Thompson,
Dr. Danette Ming, Bishop Anthony Campbell, and Pastor Shelley Antoni. Nothing is off limits for discussion. Follow ORB Ministries on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, and be ready for the next hot topic on Truth Matters.
All right. Did I lose Bishop Ball? Where did he fall off? Okay, he's back.
Here. I'm here.
Oh, come on, man. Don't just get yourself this guys. What, you've been traumatized because of things? No, I just want to throw this in there, my friend, that I have this book, Don't Judge Me by My Scars or Hold Me Hostage to My Past.
Yeah.
This one, everybody need to read this one. If you've been judged or held hostage, you got to read it. If you're judged and hold people hostage, you need to read this one. This will be released it's a pre-release copy in my hand here. If you're in the United States or a territory, you can get an autograph copy from me. Next week, Tuesday night, is being released on Amazon. You can get your pre-order there if you're around the world. But if you're in the America, Bishop, you get a copy from me because you get my autograph for the same price
Looking
on
forward to
Amazon.
it. Yeah.
All right, so that should be an interesting read.
Very good.
All right, here we back with Bishop. Now we find what he was looking for.
Yeah. And congratulations on your latest publication, my brother.
Thank you, my friend. I appreciate it.
I can't wait to get my copy. So my sister, and I just shared it with you as well. But the CDC and Shamser comes up with 6 principles of trauma informed, and what I have done. And by the way, I'm doing 2 workshops during the assembly down in Florida.
Yes.
On
Cool.
some of this work. But the CDC came up with these 6 principles, and what I've done is I've taken the 6 principles of trauma informed practices and have really pulled it apart in terms of our community. And we don't have time to do that here, but I'll just name the 6 principles that they talk about.
Right.
But 5 of the 6 are very relevant to us here. One is safety, and that safety includes physical safety, psychological safety, social safety, moral safety, right? So like within our faith community, what does it mean for people to experience psychological safety? I'll give you really something very, very simple. Especially some of our in some of our faith communities that are, that's very informal in nature. You may have a person who doesn't know how to read, but you call them up and you ask them to read the scripture.
Yeah.
And they don't want to say no.
Correct.
But they go up there and they try to do the very best they can. And the truth of the matter is there's plenty of things that they can do, and it's no shame. There's plenty of things that they can do. That shouldn't be one of them.
Correct.
And so sometimes we ask people to do things. We need to leverage people's strength.
Yes.
Like operate from a place of strength so that people are not embarrassed or ashamed. Like 20 years later, some people still remember that the great deal of shame that they experienced. So whether it's physical safety, like some people, and again, I talk a lot about this in some of the work that I do. Some people, they've been through so much trauma, so many traumas, that they don't like to sit. And the way our churches are structured is that you have people sitting behind you, like everybody's sitting in a row. Like some people that don't like to have their back turned, some people like that. They need to see I want to see who's coming. I want to see who is going. And so they want, there's certain things need, and I talk about like the touching or hugging, or like some people, so like to really engage in conversations with people. So the first one is, again, is safety. And I mentioned the different kinds of safety, like not, and then the next one is trustworthiness and transparency. Like if we say we're going to do something, we should do it. If we say we're going to show up someplace for someone, we should do it. And if we can't do it, we should tell them that unfortunately I can, and I'm going to send someone else, for example, or something like that. And transparency, like to be open and honest, whether it's transparency with the budget, with finances, whether it's transparency with our relationships with each other. Like those are some of the critical things that we can do. Number 3 is peer support. This is what, Sister Shauna, this is what you talked about. Like your friends came. And in my work, and what Bishop spoke about in my work, and I was actually talking about this today in my training. When bad things happen and when kids die, we bring in all these adults to really come in and support. But can I tell you what I see consistently? I see kids, teenagers. I see them huddle. I see them circle up around each other. I see sometimes one girl go into her book bag and take out a brush. And while they're crying, this one is brushing, this one's here, this one is braiding, and they're looking at pictures and they're crying and they're laughing and they're those who are professionals like me, you can't touch that. You can't near it. All of your degrees cannot come near.
That's correct. That's
personal touch.
But it's not just personal. It's like peer support, and it's what my sister just talked about. The girlfriends that you talk about, they moved in. They didn't need your permission. They didn't need your permission because they know that when things happen, we show up for each other.
That's right.
And if I should talk to you long enough, you will know that when things happen, we show up for each other. And if I should talk to you long enough, you will know that when things happen, we show up for each other. And so you know what you'll tell me? You'll says when they had their troubles may not be the magnitude of yours,
Yes.
something. Guess what you
You
did,
showed up.
Oh yeah.
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
That's so true, Dr. Ball, because one of the friends, she had an operation, and me and the other friend, we just turned up, drove down to Stoke-on-Trent, got our bag packed. The one picked me up. We just went down and we moved in. We slept in the same bed for a couple of days and looked after her. So yeah,
And so that's it. So peer support is important. And what does that do? It reduces the centrality and the importance of the pastor. And I want to say that we're not the be all end all.
Yes.
Sometimes we need to shrink and let the congregation heal each other.
Yes.
And so those are some of the trauma informed things that we could do. Number 4 is collaboration and mutuality. Rather than just telling people this is what we're doing and that's it, how about let the best idea surface to the top? There's somebody actually sitting in the congregation that has a better idea than you.
Yes, yes, that's true.
What level of humility? Okay, buddy. Your name is not pastor, but I got to admit, your idea is better than mine.
For sure.
And so to be okay, so collaboration and mutual. Can I tell you something? When I was and I'm no longer a senior pastor, I support 8 of our churches now.
Right.
But when I was buying a building for our congregation, a small building we bought, you know what I did? This is what I told them. I said, let me explain something to y'all. This building costs a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
I am not buying this building. We're buying this building. And so I said, after church, I asked them to open the building, and I took the entire congregation, the kids, the adults, everybody, and we stood and we walked in the building, we toured the building, we look around, and then I stand up in front of the building and say, so what do y'all think? Because you know what? I told them, if we hit hard times,
it's not me.
It was us.
and that's really my approach to leadership. We are in this together. If it flops, if things don't turn out right, we will get through it together because we did it together. And so this idea of not top-down leadership, but collaboration and mutuality is critical. And all great leaders know that. You cannot do it by yourself, and you can't legislate the heart.
Amen.
You could legislate a parking ticket. If you don't get it, we're going to boot your car, but you cannot legislate the heart. And so those are some things. And I'm just going to say, and the other one is voice and choice. And people should be given choices. People should have a say. People should, invite people to help to create community. So my sister, there's a lot more that we could talk about, but just on a local church level, those are some things we could do to become more trauma informed.
Right.
Yeah, I think in a simple way is creating the awareness.
Yeah.
And I think not having the awareness, then there's nothing to trigger your attention or trigger. How do we do it? So we have to create the awareness, number one. And then we figure out if we can do it by ourselves, call helping. Call help to say, help us to figure this out. What are the steps we're supposed to take? Because undeniably, this is real.
Yeah.
And I think we struggle because we never identify situations like these, let alone address them.
Yeah.
And if you don't identify it, you can't address it. And if you don't know, you're not aware of it, you can't identify it, and therefore you can't address it. So the step one is to be aware, and that wow.
Yeah, raise awareness.
Good discussion. Good discussion. Somebody already said we must have part 2. So we're gonna have to ask Bishop Ball to take a look at his calendar. I know Sister Seneca is somewhere there because she maybe keep the calendar, and so Sister Seneca, please look at his calendar
she's in Pittsburgh someplace. She's away for work, but I see her chiming in.
She's on. Trust me.
Distance doesn't matter right now, my friend. Technology, distance doesn't matter. Okay, it's not like you have a ride downtown and drop a telegram, and you have to ride your bicycle down there. Now you can stay from anywhere. So please take a look at his calendar and let us know when we can do part 2, because I'm sure this should be so important, and this is so healthy. This is so healthy. My goodness, this is so healthy. We
Mm.
have done our 43 minutes of this, and I think there's so much that we haven't even addressed, because just the
Right.
layout of what Bishop Ball gave us at the beginning,
Yeah.
it drove me to go take a look at the at 10 of the 10. What are the 10 adverse childhood experiences, or the 10 ACEs that they call it? And I look up that, and boy, if we take those one by something, I want to ask you, Bishop, and it, some of these trauma come out, and we never used to call some things trauma,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
A lot of
Yeah.
things we never identify. You know, we
Right.
just kind of know something happened that not right, and
Right.
something that we didn't know. So okay, this is a result of trauma. We some of them we call them behavioral issues,
Yes.
right? Things that have not been addressed, that we experience and not been addressed, hadn't been remedied. We never deal with it, never talk about it, never get any direction, counsel. We never open ourselves. And what can you say about having these things locked up
Mhm.
and don't address them? Because sometimes
Mhm.
sometimes you have issues that you have not addressed or talk about. You are maybe embarrassed, afraid, ashamed, whichever one, to talk about it. You don't want it to become known to anybody else. So therefore, but you don't get rid of the impact, because it's there unaddressed. The impact is still there. So that's one point. The other one that I want to that follows up on that: how do you see that? And from study research, you know that, or that. How do you see some of those things affecting relationships, even with wives and husbands?
Yeah.
Unaddressed issues that
Mm.
you say they find a way to break out now, because and now you have a wife, or you have a husband who is at a disadvantage,
Yeah.
because everything you try to dump load on them, they pour it out, and they don't even know where it's coming from and why it's coming, but it's issues that have not been dealt with for decades for some people.
Yeah. I'll start with the last question first, and in part because the first question, it's an ongoing conversation. But here's what I do see, and here's what I know. Right? Trauma, it wires the brain. It shapes what we sometimes call genes expression. It wires the way we think. It wires the way we feel. It wires the way we act. It wires the way we interact with each other. It wires how safe we think the world is, how safe we think we are in the world, how powerful we think we are. Like the space that you walk through this life
Right.
in, right?
Right.
Like it impacts how you shrink in the presence of difficulties or threat. The brain that has been traumatized is always on the lookout, kind of what I've said before. It's
Right.
always, and I want you to remember this: the brain that has been traumatized is always on the lookout for more dangers,
Yes.
right? Like the person, so think about it like this: if you are in your house and someone breaks through your window and comes in and take your pressure cooker, right,
Right.
or whatever it is, even if there wasn't a significant, or someone broke, think about the last time someone broke into your car. You're sitting in that car and it's as though that person is in there with you.
Right.
You feel unsafe. You
Correct.
feel as though your
Yeah.
car
Hmm.
been violated. You
Right.
feel,
Right.
and it sits there, and you feel
Yeah.
almost strange being in the car, the same car that you went in yesterday, the
Right.
same car that you went in the day before. Now you're in the car and you feel out, like you're having an out of body experience,
Right.
because you've been violated. And trauma, it makes you feel unsafe and that you're ready for the next thing to happen. And so the person who falls deeply in love, and but the trauma of the past are always there. So someone says something like, why did you do that?
Mhm.
That was a stupid idea. But that person who had been called stupid since they were a kid, who didn't think they're smart and were
Right.
the last one in the class, or
Right.
blah 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 blah, when that person hears that
Mhm.
was a stupid idea, you know what that person hears?
Yeah. Yeah.
That person hear that I am
Mhm.
not good enough,
Right.
or the person in the family that they were treated as as a second fiddle, or they weren't the preferred child, or they were the black sheep.
Mhm.
Now they are in their intimate spaces and they reached over to give the person a hug or a kiss, and the
Mhm.
person pull away from them. That person just see it as being pulling away, but the person who wasn't treated well as a kid growing up,
Here we go again.
that's right, a deep sense of rejection
For
sets in.
sure. For
And
sure.
so they feel unloved, they feel
Yeah.
dirty, they feel as though they're
Mhm.
unworthy, they feel, and they either lock themselves away or they become enraged. They either lock
Mm.
themselves away or they become enraged. And I spend a lot of times talking to school officials. And I wrote a book recently that's called, there's a chapter in it that's called Learning to Love Other People's Children.
Mhm.
I spend a lot of times talking to school officials about the kids who are explosive, who fight, and like
Yeah.
because of their trauma. And everybody, that those are the kids that the squeaky wheel gets the gears. Right? Those
Yeah.
are the kids that everybody pay
Mhm.
attention to. But you know what I tell them? I said, I want you to pay attention to that child who
Mhm.
sits in the back with their hoodie over
Yeah.
their head.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
don't mess with anyone. They
Yeah.
don't, they just move through. And you
Correct.
said, what an amazing kid.
Yeah. Hmm.
No, all it is that
Mhm.
they've turned the trauma
Correct.
inward,
Yes.
and the kid who
Yes.
is fighting has turned it outwards. And you
Yes.
think the
Mhm.
one, a lot of times the kid who has turned it outward will recover faster
That's
than the
correct.
ones who have turned
Hmm.
it inward against the
Yeah,
self.
realize. Mm.
Yeah.
I see something in the chat I want to just say something on. It says most pastors are forgotten after retirement. And before it said that some pastors, when they retire, they feel isolated.
Yeah.
Um, that is something that we're gonna have to work with, and that's a whole
Yeah.
nother show
It's a
because
whole other kettle of fish.
we have to we don't prepare well for retirement and all of that stuff. But something I want to encourage us as ministers to do, because I noticed even for myself, I didn't do it at first. But we need to be thinking about what life looks like after this and
Mhm.
plan for it, make plans for it.
Mhm.
Secondly, if I pastor a church, I pastored one for 18 years. After I leave, I'm not attending that church again. I
Mm.
may visit. Why am I not attending? Because I want the new pastor to have free reign. I used to be an influencer. Now, some folks are mature enough to attend that church and not impact the new pastor. But in some faith traditions, you have to sign a document that says you will not attend that church because sometimes you create chaos. I'm just saying that we pastors, to take care of ourselves, is to think about what this looks like when I'm no longer in this role.
Mhm.
And Dr. Ball, you know this. I shouldn't be defined by what I'm doing
That's right.
because
That's
when
right.
I stop doing it, I'm going to have a problem.
That's right. And
Mm.
and
Yeah.
that's
Go ahead.
and I really appreciate you saying that, my brother. And part of the problem, and you know what's interesting, my wife and I talk about it on so many levels. We also talk about it with our kids. We
Right.
love our kids, and our
Yeah.
kids are just amazing human beings, but they're passing through.
Of course.
They're passing through my house.
Yes.
And at some point, and what happens sometimes in marriages, once the kids pass through the home and they're
Mhm.
on their own, what
Mhm.
begins to happen is that your marriages becomes a crisis point. The
Yeah.
same thing is with with the professions that
Yes.
we lead. When
Hmm.
you become when you're a pastor, the worst thing, can I just say this, the worst
Hmm.
thing that could happen to a preacher, a pastor, is the day after their retirement, or the day after they're removed, or the day after they're incapacitated, so they're no longer able to. The day that they sit down and says, "Who am I? What am I going to do? Where is my life?" That's a big problem. And
Yes.
part
It
of
is.
it is you have to plan for retirement. You have to save something, but you
Yeah.
must. But here's the thing: nobody gives their entire life, morning, noon, and night, to pastoring, then leave pastorate and retire and find another life. It actually doesn't
Yes.
work.
Yes.
What you have to do is you have to build other spaces
Yes.
while
Yes.
you are
Yes.
pastoring. You can't
Correct.
wait until you leave. No.
No.
That's right. So I see Bishop Thompson, with his family, and he's here and he's there. You have to peel away, and you
Yes,
have to
for
know that
sure.
pastoring is a calling, it's a profession,
Yes,
but it is not
right.
your life.
Correct.
My kids are not my life. My
Yes,
job is not my
yes,
life.
right.
So you have to be able to create like, to go back to the Genesis narrative, the
Yes,
morning and the night, the
yes,
sun and the
yes.
moon, the star to
Hmm.
rule by night and the moon by night and the sun to rule by day. Those are seasons, those are
Yes.
appropriateness, and so we have to have appropriate boundaries in our lives as well.
Yeah.
By God's grace and help, when I get to the point of not pastoring anymore, I can still do this.
Of course.
I
And
can
I
I
just
can I can still talk to all
Of
of you
course.
guys, no matter
And
where
you
in the
can still
world
write
you
books.
are. You
Can
can
write books.
right. I'm going to be writing at least maybe one per year when I retire, and then I'm going to do programs like these and have discussions on topics that I
Of
think are
course.
relevant to
Of
people's lives,
course.
and I think
Yes.
that's going to be very fulfilling for
Of
me.
course. Most
Dr.
definitely.
Dr. Greenaway, and I'll say this last thing. Bishop Dr. Greenaway, my presbyter here in the Northeast, our presbyter, Bishop Beckford, in the Northeast region here, he jokingly talked about he can't wait for his beach ministry. That's it.
Yes. He tells me that too.
He calls it his beach ministry. And
Yeah.
what he's really talking about is he looks forward to the day
Yes.
where where
Yes.
he
You
goes
go,
and
go preach to the sons of the sea, right?
so I just wanted to say that,
That's
have a beach ministry.
I agree with you. I agree with you, Bishop. I agree with you, and this is this. Well, I didn't start this ministry because this started from out of COVID, right?
Yes.
Because COVID started when I was doing my residency.
Right.
And I started to do this program to talk to teachers and students and doctors and nurses after during the COVID period to see how they were handling this hybrid, virtual thing, and then it climbed or skyrocketed to where we are dealing with all subjects like these. And then I realized, you know what, maybe this is something that the Lord is really developing, and I'm pulling alongside my pastoral ministry because I've been in this for a long, 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 long time, way long before Bishop Ball, and he's gone already, That, so,
I'm going to piggyback on you because I did one of these as well. So I have some experience.
I know
So
you were doing one of that up in Canada. So hey, man, get the tools back up, shine up the tools,
I will.
and get.
Mm.
Wow! This has been a great, great, great conversation. Really, really,
Really
really.
enjoyed it. I learned a lot.
I expected it to be good, but if I would give an assessment, this is way more than I thought.
Mm.
I mean, the amount that came out of this tonight is way more than I anticipated.
Yes.
And again, I'm making my cry to Sister Seneca to just let me know the next available date on Bishop Brother Ball's calendar so we can put it. And I'm sure everybody would be looking forward for part 2. In the meanwhile, I'm going to suggest to everybody who is online with us tonight to make sure that you share it. Make sure that you share it, because it is not enough if you don't share it, because there's so many people that you could help simply by sharing it with some other people. You could change somebody's life. You could make somebody's marriage healthier. You could make a child live longer. You could make a relationship last long. You could make somebody blood pressure go down by just understanding how do I deal with the issues that I'm facing. I'm going to ask Bishop Ball on the closing of this. I'm going to give Bishop Thompson to the opportunity to give his closing thoughts, and Reverend Ashana. And Bishop, I'm going to ask you at the end of this, if you don't mind, to just kind of do that little reading that you did at the beginning, or that if you can do that again, is that okay?
Tell me which one.
They'll give us the aces with all the impact of even your organs. I just want to hear that again. All right. So Bishop, you can do that. Reverend Ashana, you can do that, and then we're gonna give Bishop Ball the last say on this tonight.
Well, I want to thank you, Dr. Beckford, for having us, and the panelists. Really enjoyed it. I learned quite a bit. It was refreshing. Thank you, Dr. Ball. Thank you, Minister Shonda, for sharing your experience. Our prayers continue with you and Dr. Beckford.
Yes.
Because I'm so tied to the church, my last comments are going to be, I want to see how we can empower and train and educate, just like Sister Shauna mentioned before, our leaders and lay leaders, because this is very important. Dr. Ball has pointed out some really good thing, because if we are more understanding and we are you know, aware of all of these, it's going to make us more compassionate. It's going to give us stronger communities. So thanks again. Appreciate being here.
Nothing greater than when you are equipped. I said this again, time and again. If you don't have tools,
Yes.
jobs pass you, right? Because you could get a job, but you don't have no tool to do the job.
For sure.
And if you have tools and don't know how to use it, you still have a problem. You could have a whole lot of tools, but you don't know how to use it. I think we need to have tools and know how to use the tools, and we're going to be the most impactful by that.
Well, I say that because our vision is to equip, develop, and empower. So
Amen.
That's what we're working on.
God bless you. Reverend Ashana.
Good morning again, Bishop Beckford. What can I say? Thank you so much for the opportunity to be part of this amazing discussion this evening. It's exceeded what anything that I could have imagined. And I just want to say thank you to Dr. Ball. I've learned so much, and from Bishop Woodrow. I got to get his name, Bishop Woodrow. Thank you for the discussion. But what I want to ask Bishop Ball is this. I jump on the back of what Bishop Woodrow said about the training and having the materials to deliver. And my question is this, Bishop Ball. I'm going to be presumptuous now.
Go ahead.
And ask this question, Bishop Beckford. So is there a way that you could train us, some of us,
Yes,
online? I don't know how, some kind of forum where you could train us that we could then deliver some training to our local assembly.
Yeah.
In some ways, you know, equip us that we can equip the body of Christ.
Yes. And we've been doing that. For example, I'll deliver 2 of those trainings at our assembly, as I indicated.
Yes.
But what I've not done as yet, I've done a lot of, piecemeal training. I think what I would like to do is to roll out like a full, series
Yes.
across the continental United States, the
That would be
Caribbean.
amazing.
Because I do it all the time. I have the
Yeah.
resources, I have the materials. Like the truth is, I tomorrow morning, again, I indicated that I'm doing this 3-part training. I'll tie it up tomorrow morning, 4 hours, 4 hours, 4 hours, and it's all on trauma, the brain, and how to heal our community. And so, for example, the power of play. What I did today for 4 hours sustained about how things like serotonin and dopamine and oxytocin, how they're released in the bloodstream when we play and how we bond with each other. And so churches, your picnic and some of those things is not just to have fun, is to really to create to connect community. So absolutely. So I really appreciate the inquiry, and I don't think it's presumptuous at all. In fact, I think it's necessary. And so I thank you for that. So when time allows, my hope is that I'll be able to build some of those out, and hopefully I'll be able to get back.
Hopefully I can collect royalty on that too.
Yes.
And someone put in the chat, will be a protege.
Definitely.
I appreciate that. So you want me just to segue into?
Yes, please.
So and much of what I'm talking about, the research is out there, right? It's like it's the research is there. I teach at Fordham University. I teach a course on assessing, treating kids who have been traumatized, and so it's the interesting things. One of the things I have to say to my students, my graduate students, every semester when I'm teaching, let's say a class like that, says 2 things. One, it's to teach you all of the things that's required, the signs, the symptoms, the PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, depression, some of the other impact from being exposed to trauma. But one of the things I always say to them is, the other task is to address the you in the room and not get stuck there.
Yes.
And the reason why I have to say that is, and at the end of the semester, invariably, student says, this is the most powerful class that I've taken, not because the resource or the materials were so
Hmm.
rich, but because it spoke to my own lived
Right.
experience.
Exactly, exactly.
Right. Right.
And so when I do training, I constantly say to people, you're going to go out there and you're going to do, and even whether it's to pastors or whomever it is, or clinicians or teachers, and I train school systems constantly. I'm not interested in talking to them little kids. And I tell them that I want to talk to the adults who are working with the kids. I'm not just want to talk to you about your job as a teacher or as a psychologist. You know what I want to do? I want to talk to you when you go home. I want to talk to
Yes.
you about, because what the research shows is that to train the professional to respond professionally, you don't get as much return on your investment as when
Right.
you say to the psychologist, when you're under pressure, when you're under stress, when you feel rejected,
Hmm.
how does
Hmm.
that show up in your personal life?
Right.
And then you could extrapolate or move from there back to their professional life. But let me just say, repeat this again, and I sort of just, list them off the top of my head. But I'll just name them here again, and I just pulled it up.
Go
So
ahead.
in the early 90s, about 1992 or something like
Hmm.
that, the uh, the Kaiser Permanente is the organization. Kaiser Permanente and the CDC did this study,
Right.
17,000 people, and they looked at 10 indicators or ACEs, and these are they call conventional ACEs: physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, and then on the continuum of neglect, physical neglect, emotional neglect, and then the deterioration of intimate spaces. I speak of divorce, of course, and separation. Other
Okay.
things are like substance use and abuse within the family systems. Other things are interpersonal violence or intimate partner violence or domestic violence. Different people call it different things. And the other is incarceration of a primary caregiver. And the last one is untreated mental illnesses of a primary caregiver. And what they're saying is, if by the time you're 18, if you check, and by the way, a lot of pediatricians today are doing this exact, and it's like 10 questions.
Right.
And pediatricians are doing it consistently now, because what they realize is that they need to interrupt some of these things before it gets too late. And then another study looks at things like community violence, bullying, kids living in foster cares,
Right.
neighborhood violence, and then other things like racism. And so, what does the research shows? That the more ACEs you have, the more negative life outcomes that you will have. So,
Right.
those with 6 or more ACEs, they're likely to die 2 decades earlier than those with none.
That's a
What
lot of
does the,
years.
that's right. That's a lot of years. Those with 67% of the general populations have at least one of those ACEs, whether it's neglect in our family, whether it's, all the things that I just mentioned. And those with 4 or more ACEs, I didn't mention, with those with 4 or more ACEs, they're more likely to experience anxiety and depression, more likely to experience suicidality, more likely to abuse substance, more likely to develop cirrhosis of the liver from substance use, are more likely to engage in early sexual promiscuous behaviors, more likely for young kids, more likely to develop cognitive
Hmm.
impairment, more
Right.
likely to not do well academically, more likely to engage in risk-taking behaviors.
Hmm.
Right. And so on the death certificate of many people, most people, what the research is now emerging to say is that if you look beneath the accident, if you look beneath
Hmm.
the drunk driving, if
Right.
you look beneath
Right.
the hypertension and the heart disease that people die from, if you back up into their childhood, back up into their families of origin, back up into those formative experiences, what it would be, not that the person died of a heart
Right.
condition,
Right.
but that person actually died of ACEs.
Right.
Mhm.
Right.
So
Well,
those, go ahead, Bishop.
I'm gonna pull back the layers to see what my aces are. Thank you for
Yeah,
educating me
and
tonight.
and and in my training, and if you just type in adverse childhood experience
Right.
questionnaire, it pops
Right.
up, and it's 10 questions.
Adverse child.
adverse childhood experience.
Okay.
Yeah,
Good.
adverse childhood experiences. If
Thank
you
you,
just
man.
type that
Appreciate it.
in and put questionnaire, adverse childhood experience questionnaire,
Right.
they will pop up. But the last thing I'm going to say is this, because that's the problem. There's another term that we use that's called neuroplasticity, and
Yes.
I call it
Very
another
good.
word for hope. Neuroplasticity simply
Right.
is this:
Yes.
because you've experienced all of those things, it doesn't mean necessarily that yes, you will
Yes.
die earlier,
Correct. Correct.
because we are resilient. And
Yes.
even though we have experienced all of those traumas, we can still recover. Like what Sister Ashana talks about, like what Bishop Beckford talks about, like what we have all known.
Hmm.
When we're deeply loved, when we belong
Right.
to community, when we face our fears, when we face our trauma, when we create testimony services, when we create loving environment, when we disrupt the generational patterns, what we do know, we can recover and we can get better. And that is a part of the hope of our faith community as well.
And because we are Christ followers,
That's
that's
right.
powerful.
Yes.
One thing that you said, and we're closing, my friends. It's been a great night. You want you just talk about a while ago that we don't do anymore? Testify.
Yes.
No. When I was a young Christian, you have 3, 4 people start testifying at the same time.
Yeah.
Just like you start to testify at the same time, you gotta pause and hold your testimony. When I was much younger, when you have to practice your testimony, you want to testify first because you don't want somebody to testify your testimony, because that was when your testimony was a planned testimony, not an experienced testimony. But now people don't testify. You don't know what they're going through. You don't know what God has done for them. We don't do that. We don't do that anymore. And I think that testimony that you talk about, that open expression, it is so important, and we don't do it again. We bottle up everything and we die under the pressure with the things that we should have been opening and saying, and we don't do them anymore. God help us. My friends, Reverend Ashani, do you give your last word already?
I have, yes. I'm
Okay.
looking forward to the material from Bishop Paul coming soon.
Sounds like
All right. Well, God bless you. This was a great night. When I asked Bishop Ball to join me, and I wanted to talk about something that he's dealing with and what issues like these, and they kind of say, let's talk about how the long-term effect of trauma. And I'm gonna paraphrasing there, and I did not imagine this to come out of this tonight. This is way bigger than I thought, and I hope that by the help of God, the fact that this is going to be available over and over and over and over again. If you missed the beginning of it, you can go back and watch it from the beginning, because this is just an amazing discussion that we've had with all of us here on the panel. And Pastor Shelley and Tony, we wish that you were here with us, and but you're somewhere in St. Vincent, still surviving from burial, and we're glad to see that you can at least stopping into joining in the chat tonight. But God bless you, everybody. Please, if you have not yet shared this live, you can share it now. And once we're gone off, you can go back and listen, and don't stop sharing it, because you could change many, many lives by simple sharing it to your friends and family. That's all you need to do. You don't have to talk to them, just share it and let them sit down and listen and find healing and hope and strength and direction. And they can tell it to their pastors, to their churches. How do we address things like these? Because they are real. The bishop tells us, the Dr. Val tells us, 60-something% of the general population has at least one of these ACEs, and some got 4 and 6.
Yes.
That is dangerous ground.
Yeah.
We need help. There's a cry. There's a desperate cry for help right now. We got to begin to help ourselves and help others around us. Thank you for joining me on another Truth Matters. This is really Truth Matters. This is not Let's Talk with the Doc. This is Truth Matters, and it really matters. And so thank you for joining us, my friend. I look forward to seeing you again next week. By the way, again, this book is available. I'm going to have a discussion. Next week, Tuesday night, the 16th, when this book will be released at midnight. I want to have a discussion between 10 and midnight. I have maybe still room for 2 or 3 people to join me who have been been judged by their scars or held hostage to their past. If you want to join me in that discussion, email me quickly. I might have 2 or 3 spaces to join me in a discussion to talk about experience, and we'll go and talk until the book is being released. But for the time being, you can get a copy from me directly.
Need my copy, Bishop.
Well, you got it, Bishop. You get a copy from me soon and very soon. When we get out, we'll get that your information, and we'll send that to you, my friends. You can get a copy. Everybody need to read it. Pastor, layman, the hurt and the offended and the offender. Everybody need to read this. I'll see you again next time on another Let's Talk with the Doc. You're gonna stay right there, and we're gonna say goodbye like how we came on. All right. So God bless you, my friends. We'll see you again on another Let's Talk with the Doc. God bless you. Take care.
God bless you. Good to meet you, Reverend Deshauna.
Yes.
Good to meet you too. Good to meet you too, Bishop Monroe.
Don't forget to follow and subscribe on all the platforms we try to take it here. God bless you. See you again next week.
God bless you.
Well, thank you for checking in on ORB Ministries. I trust that you will share with your friends, subscribe, hit the bell for notification, and stay tuned, because you never know what's next or who will join the conversation.